me get a sign-in sheet. What's that? I know it does. All right, let me get a sign-in sheet, guys, and then we'll get the show on the road. You guys can keep talking, relax a little bit, get ready for the show. All right, we will get going. I'm going to pass this sign-in sheet around. If you don't mind giving us your name, email, we'll keep in contact with you. Send us our newsletter and all that kind of good stuff. My name's Rich. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville. Just so you know what you're here for, this is our family group. So if you're here for the PTA meeting or anything, you're in the wrong room. That was a joke. This is a tough subject, so we try to use a little bit of humor to kind of lighten things up a little bit. I have an agenda for tonight that I was planning on going through and kind of giving some basic information around what is addiction, what is recovery. But as always, I'm very interested in what you guys may want to talk about. A little bit about my background real quick. So I have a master's degree in sociology with a concentration in addiction studies. I have an MBA. I'm a licensed clinical addiction specialist, certified clinical supervisor, certified employee assistance professional. These are all different things you have to do to be able to work with people in different settings, right? So that's kind of who I am professionally, and I've been at this for, 18 years. But I'm also a person in recovery myself. And to talk a little bit about my story real quick, I probably had a problem with alcohol for a long time, but really the thing that brought me to my knees was prescription opioids. You hear a lot about this in the news now. In 1998, I was in a car accident. This is in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. It was kind of like at the beginning of the you're not allowed to feel pain movement, and I was getting these things hand over fist, and didn't buy them from the street. I always got them from a doctor, but let me tell you, they took me to a dark place. Really, really quickly, I found recovery via an intervention and, pretty typical recovery pathway. I always joke, I always say, like, if you walk in your house and your family's all sitting in a circle and there's a stranger with them, that's an intervention. I guarantee it. Just agree with them and go wherever they want you to go. So that's my experience. I was going to talk a little bit about tonight. Well, let me just do a couple other things like this. So this isn't meant to be a therapy group. I am a clinician, that kind of thing, but the approach here at Favor is a little bit different. It's meant to just be education, information sharing, okay? So if you're in therapy or you're in another program, don't change what you're doing. There are a lot of different people out there that have a lot of different opinions. There are probably people out there who don't agree with me. They have a different way of looking at things. They're wrong, but, you stick with whatever you're doing, that kind of thing. Take this for what it's worth. It's meant to be education, information. I'm going to say a lot of things tonight. It may or may not apply to your individual situation. I don't want to tell you exactly how to run your family situation. You guys know the situation much better than I do, but I do want to give you general information around what you're dealing with. So ask questions. We'll try to cover whatever we can. We go until 8 o'clock, so in an hour and a half, we're going to try to get whatever we can covered as we go through it. All right, so does anyone have any burning desire or anything that they're dealing with they want to make sure that we cover tonight? I'll go through my agenda. Yes, ma'am.
You know how you showed us the pictures of the brain where it's
like
all
that.
Messed up from using drugs?
Yes.
Okay, my kid is in treatment right now, and he's taking Suboxone. Does that mess with your recovery of your brain? I mean, what is it?
It's a good question.
Move forward, or is he going to be stuck somewhere?
Okay, so the hardest thing about this is trying to understand what's going on with the person. Her question is, does Suboxone mess with the recovery process? And so you're talking about this experience.
Right.
Okay. So remember, we've talked in here before about what goes on when a person crosses that line into addiction. You can have a lot of different manifestations of substance use. It doesn't always mean the person's addicted. People can abuse substances. People can misuse substances. You can get in a lot of trouble out there with a lot of different things without ever crossing the line into addiction. This is if a person crosses the line into addiction. What happens is the neurotransmitter dopamine, it stops production, and it leads to this kind of compulsive seeking of the substance, whether it's alcohol, cocaine, pills, whatever it might be. Suboxone is a partial agonist that replaces, that kind of takes the place of the opioid, and it reduces craving and it reduces withdrawal symptoms. It won't impede the recovery process. You will have people that will tell you to impede the recovery process. That's just their opinion. It's not a medical fact. What will impede the recovery process is if the person abuses Suboxone. What will impede the recovery process is if the person doesn't take it the way they're supposed to. If they take it one day and then they stay off it so that they can do other things, and then they take it another day, because you will hear people doing that. Suboxone has gotten a really, really bad name because there are a lot of folks, and I work with a lot of folks who've taken Suboxone. This is just my experience. There are a lot of folks who have abused it. And so they've never used it the way that they were supposed to. That would be highly problematic. But if you're taking it as a doctor prescribed and you're taking it the way you're supposed to, it shouldn't be problematic. The person needs to engage in a recovery process. They need to engage in individual therapy, for example. They need to engage in groups if they can. If they're only taking the medication, I would be concerned that that's not going to get it done. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
he's doing all that stuff too, but I just didn't know if that was.
So if it's part of a whole entire program, then what you also see is the recovery experience for people changes over time. Some people who come in stay on it for a while. Some people who come in stay on it for a short period of time. It's very different for different people. But if they're doing all these other things, I hope you can see that that part of the process is just as important as taking the medication. Learning how to be around other people, learning how to find something to do that doesn't involve all these other substances. Learning how to deal with anxiety, learning how to deal with depression, learning how to deal with all those other co-occurring issues. That's just as important as taking the medication. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments about that? Yes, sir.
My son went to Four Circles in August of last year. He got out in 1st of November, went to sober living in Wilmington, he's still there. In fact, we were in Wilmington last weekend, and he's getting out of sober living in a week or so. But we had gone out to dinner and come back, and he got a call from one of his roommates at the sober living deal to go meet him at a bar. And I'm saying, that Rich Jones says that doesn't sound like a...
Did you say exactly that? You should have if you didn't.
I didn't believe Rich Jones. I said Cleveland. And we talked, and I said, well, does your sponsor know you're doing this? Does your house manager know you're doing this? He said, yeah. He said, my roommate just called and he's got a couple of girls, and where am I going to meet girls?
Yeah.
So he got back in a couple of hours and he's in good shape. And I said, well, how was the bar? He said, well, we didn't stay there very long. We went to the girls' apartment. He said, what am I supposed to do? He'll be 23 years old tomorrow.
It's a great question. It's a great question. And so, so the question was, if you didn't hear, his son had told him that he was going out, and he was going to meet some guys, and they were going to be at a bar. And so you get into this situation when a person's trying not to drink or trying not to use any substances. If that becomes your goal, you start to ask yourself some logical questions. How do you make that easier on yourself? And one of the ideas, you don't go around it. You don't go around it. If that's your personal goal, you don't go around it. What I will tell you is that changes for people. There are people who will tell you that they can go and they can be around these situations and it doesn't bother them. It has a lot to do with who you are as a person. It has a lot to do with how long you've been in a recovery process. I could kind of go wherever I wanted and it wouldn't bother me. But for me, it's been 17 years of recovery and not using anything. We would always say, err on the side of caution in a situation like that. But for family members, part of it also is, how do you even deal with that? What if you even know for sure that they're hanging out with somebody that they shouldn't be hanging out with? Because you guys get in a situation where you can't control that in the person. And the person will get very, very resentful if all you're doing, and I'm not saying this is what you were doing, sir. A person will get very resentful if you're, hey, how's it going? What have you been up to? Did you go to your meetings? Are you going to a bar? Who are you talking to? Did you go see your therapist? Did you call your psychiatrist? Are you taking your medicine? If every single conversation is all about, are you doing the right thing, the person will get very, very resentful. I think I've shared in here before, I have a real long-term relationship with a kid that I've worked with from Pennsylvania. And, I'll never forget the conversation he had with his dad when he said, like, can't we ever just talk about the weather? Can't we ever just talk about a football game? Why does it have to always be about what's going on with me? Now, we know why those questions are being asked. And I have great empathy for parents. I completely understand why you're asking that question. You're asking that question because you're scared and you're worried and you're anxious and you want to know what's going on. So you ask the question. But you have to temper that. You have to. There's sort of like, how often do you ask? How much do you ask? And do you feel like you can get to a point in your relationship with the person where it's just normal, where you can have normal conversations? That may be very difficult, depending on the circumstances. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we had a good situation, and in talking to him, I told him I didn't know how to be his counselor, his sponsor, or whatever, but all I'm telling you is what I heard at Favor. And
that's a good way to say it.
I just want you to be doing what you need to do for you. I can't tell you what you need to do to you, but you've got your sponsor, you've got a therapist, you've got your house.
Yeah.
So we really.
I don't know if
the times we talked about that was he totally brought it up himself.
Yeah. So his comment was, all he said was, I can't tell you what to do. I do know what I heard at Favor. And you could say some version of that where you're sort of taking yourself out of the mix and you're just saying, hey, this is just what I've been told about this issue. Now this assumes that the person's in a recovery process. A lot of you guys might be dealing with somebody who's not even in a recovery process, and so you can't even necessarily have that conversation. Remember, everybody's at different stages. You might be dealing with somebody who is actively using and you're trying to figure out how to do an intervention or how to approach that. Or you might be dealing with somebody who's in an early recovery process. If they're early on, let's say the first 30 days, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do and they're trying to figure out their life or however you want to do it, you're probably going to be much more anxious. But this has been a while. This has been, approaching a year, I would assume, right?
Yes, 8 months.
So eight months into it, you probably get a little bit of a different conversation. Yes, ma'am.
Just experienced that our son had done a month of in-house rehab after a short incarceration where we didn't bond him out, and now has been back and living with us for the last 3 weeks, going on 4 weeks, coming here regularly, multiple times, several times a week, now has a coach, is here a lot. Friday night, downtown Greenville for the music, first social setting. I know he had 2 beers, which was not what his issue was, and he believed he could have 2 beers, and the first thing I started thinking about was he needed total abstinence, not just his drug of choice, and I thought about the dopamine, and I had a question I wondered for you. We come here, and I've heard and seen this many times, and every time I go away and I go home and I read and I Google and try to get a better understanding of how long it may take him to get his brain right again. When he comes to meetings here, is this ever discussed? Are they shown that? Because
so occasionally, yeah, I will do it. I will do that in the group occasionally. The question was, do we ever show the brain to the people who are in recovery? Yeah, and I talk to a lot of people about it. So if I meet with somebody individually, I either show them a picture or I talk about what's going on with their brain. So remember, this is happening to a person at a physiological level, at a neurobiological level. Your brain starts to change as you put these substances into your system. And so he has no control over that. It happens over time, that kind of thing. The question becomes, does he buy into the idea that his brain has actually changed? That's the issue here. If I had my way, I would take a magic wand and I would just, everybody who has any concern with substances, I would say don't do anything at all ever again, right? Boom, period. That's the safest thing to do. That makes it, least likely you're going to have a full-blown relapse, right? But come on, man, that's naive. That's talking to somebody like that's not how the world works. People are they're going to start to make their decisions and they're going to start to try to figure this out. And he's saying to himself, I can drink again, okay? He isn't buying into this probably. And why do people not buy into the fact that they need to give it up altogether? First of all, maybe they haven't crossed the line. Age has a lot to do with it. Personal experience has a lot to do with it. A lot of people will give up certain substances but not give up other substances, that kind of thing. I gave up everything. When I finally found recovery, I gave up everything. And if you really want the truth, I gave up everything because I had a long and storied career with a hell of a lot of different substances. You know, I never met a substance that I didn't like. So I bought into the idea of just give everything up. One of the hardest things to give up for people coming into this is alcohol. Alcohol is socially acceptable. Everywhere we go, people are drinking. So it's very, very difficult for people to say, I'm not going to drink. What we do is we meet the person where they're at and we say, look, let's help you figure this out. So I would encourage him to keep coming here, because what will happen is if he falls off the rails with that, then he can get redirected. And it's almost like the evidence can become overwhelming. You know, you get to a point where the jury's in, like, come on, man, you know, you've tried to do this 3 or 4 times and it's resulted in the same thing every time. So you try to work with the person. But if you're in that situation, we would encourage you to get the person to keep coming to whatever program he's coming to so that we can help work with him in the program. There's a lot of new faces here tonight. Does anybody have any questions on what's going on in the brain? So what happens, guys, is every time you use one of these substances, one of these mood or mind-altering substances, you flood your brain with dopamine. Okay, dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's released when you experience anything pleasurable. It's a good thing. You know, dopamine is a positive thing. If you eat a good meal, dopamine is released. If you have a good conversation, dopamine is released. The problem is when you put these, let's just say you're taking pills you shouldn't be taking. When you put these pills into your system, you flood your brain with dopamine. And then what happens is over time, the brain compensates by shutting off the production of dopamine. Too much dopamine is dangerous. The analogy is, we've talked in here before, if your toilet is overflowing, you reach down and you shut off the water. So what happens in some people's brains, the brain reaches down and shuts off the production of dopamine. And that's what you see in these PET scans. You have this situation, and what happens then, the person resorts to using despite clear consequences. The person resorts to using despite the fact that they're going to lose their job. The person resorts to using despite the fact that his wife just kicked him out. Whatever it may be, because you're in this state of mind, it has nothing to do with the rational decision. It just has to do with, let me feel better, let me feel better, let me feel better. And you'll see people get in that cycle. I'm sure your loved one has been in that cycle. And you've probably witnessed it. And you just don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. You can just see where they're spiraling down and there's nothing they can do to pull themselves out of that. You have to stop using the substance and you have to let your brain reset. That's a way of thinking about it. You have to let your brain reset and kind of come back online. It's kind of like what happens whenever a computer shuts down. What do you have to hit? Control, Alt, Delete, right? Any other questions about this? All right. And can somebody check that air conditioner over there? Is it not working? Crank that thing down, man, as low as it'll go. 7,000 people in here. So how do you know whether a person has, quote-unquote, crossed that line? We've talked about this before. These are the criteria for substance use disorder. Tolerance, withdrawal, craving, inability to cut down, inability to control use, using despite physical danger, a great deal of time spent. It affects your work and school. It affects your social activities. You have interpersonal problems related to it. You meet 6 of those criteria, you technically meet criteria. If you meet 6 of those criteria in any 1 12-month period, you technically meet criteria for substance use disorder severe, which would be addiction. Addiction doesn't actually appear in terms of the medical literature. It's called substance use disorder severe. That's as close as you get to a definitive diagnosis. And of course, this is part of the problem because a lot of people who are going through this don't think that they're going through this. And how do they get better? How do people get better? They have to stop and they have to start to go to therapy. They have to start going to meetings. They have to start to evaluate this, and then slowly but surely they start to come back online. They start to feel a little bit better and they're able to reevaluate their life. So I'm going to move on to some things about setting boundaries and discussion on the relationship end of it. But anybody have any questions about this part of it? Anybody have any questions about how this works? Or comments for that matter?
Is there something in the brain that we can point to the same as that that shows the obsession part of the person? Where
Yeah, you can point to this part of the brain. The question was,
or
what
the
about...
compulsion part?
Yeah, what about... So there's this other part, and it's up here, right here, craving. This part of the obsession, whenever you think about the substance all day. You know, we've all had a craving for something in here. You know, craving for a piece of pizza, craving for an Oreo cookie, craving for a cigarette if you've ever stopped smoking. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's there. So where substances are concerned, one of the very, very hallmark symptoms is this idea of I can't quit thinking about it. It's the obsession, it's the craving. And really where that comes from is this part of the brain, and it's because there's a chemical, a neurotransmitter called glutamate that's released every time dopamine is released, and it tags that pleasurable experience, which leads to the craving and being easily triggered, and the fact that you're always preoccupied with it. Some people think it's not actually just craving for no reason. It's actually like continuously being triggered. That kind of thing. Where the environment sets you up for it. Or music on the radio sets you up for it. That kind of deal. So it's a different process, but it also contributes to it.
And the same as the compulsion part, like when you
So-
open a bag of Doritos and you just can't stop like that.
The compulsion would really be driven by this part of it, because you're desperately seeking to replace that. Think about the bucket being empty in terms of dopamine is the one thing that will allow us to feel content in any given situation. If I were to take dopamine out of your brain right now, it would be impossible for you to feel content. You would always be irritable. You would always be restless. So think about the bucket being empty. The compulsion is the desperate feel. And the reason it kicks in when you take one is because you whet your appetite, and now you're like, oh, there it is. There it is. Let me get more of that. Let me get more of that. Let me get more of that. You'll hear people talk about, I went out and I was going to have 1 or 2 beers and I wound up drinking all night. It's because you've kicked in this process. And your brain is in this desperate state. Literally, it's as if it's running the show now. It's not rational decision making. You're not thinking with the part of your brain that you make rational decisions. Your brain is just going, get it, get it, get it, get it, get it. Because it's an empty bucket. And since it's an empty bucket, you're chasing it all night, you're chasing it all night. Now, the good news is this is not a permanent condition. You stop, you reset, you get back on track, this starts to change. You lead a healthy lifestyle, this starts to change. You start to talk to a therapist, this starts to change. You go to meetings, this starts to change. You pray, you meditate, all those things, this starts to change. This is not how my brain is anymore. My brain is fully functioning with all kinds of different colors. All kinds of different neurotransmitters going off up there. But the reason we bring this up in this particular meeting is to try to get you in touch with whenever you're frustrated with your loved one. And everybody in here has probably been frustrated with their loved one, whether it's a husband, a wife, father, son, whatever, daughter, whatever it might be. You've been frustrated with the person. And whenever you're trying to get them to just make better decisions, come on, just stop doing that. What are you thinking? Let's get your act together. It's never going to work, guys. It's never going to work because you're talking to somebody and it's not about them making a better decision. It's literally about them getting a little healthier. This is a medical condition. This is a health care condition. The stigma and the shame around addiction keeps us from talking about it in the right way. First of all, we put everybody in the same category, right? There's no such thing as an individualized experience where addiction is concerned. Let's throw everybody in the same category, and it's that terrible stigmatized caricature that we have of the person walking around with a brown paper bag or ripping off the Sphinx or something like that. Let me tell you, addiction comes in all different shapes and sizes, and sometimes it's not addiction. You can call it whatever the heck you want. Something's going on with the brain. Can we all agree to that? Call it whatever the heck you want. Something is going on with the brain, so they need to take a step back, take a deep breath, and start getting some help. Then you can start having some reasonable conversations with them. How long does it take for a reasonable conversation? Anybody out there who's had this experience want to tell us their experience on that? Nobody wants to go there. I'm going to say 2 weeks, 30 days. 30 days, you're feeling pretty good, that kind of thing. You're going to be able to have they're going to be able to make better decisions about what they need to do. Have you guys ever been in that conversation where it's just circular and there's nothing you can say to the person and nothing, they don't agree with anything you say, you're giving them the best advice in the world, don't do this, don't do that. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And they're just like, no, no. Have you ever been in a conversation when they're just pissed at you all the time? When they're just angry, it doesn't matter what you say. My wife would say, she always says this, she would agree with me. Like we would be in an argument and she would be agreeing with me, and then I would flip the script and start arguing with me from the other side because I was so discontent that nothing that she could say, I was going to be disagreeable with every single thing she said because it was beyond the actual interaction that was going on. I want you guys to think about that for a minute. If you're going through this actively with your loved one right now, take a deep breath if you're in that situation, because understand it's not them. It's not about them being mad at you. It's not about them, trying to ruin your day. This has happened. Why it happened, you can say whatever you want about that. Oh, well, they were irresponsible. They should have, whatever. It happened, right? And now this is what's going on. So pick and choose your battles. Does that make sense? Pick and choose your battles and be very, very sensible as you go about kind of like addressing these issues. What other comments or thoughts about the brain? Yes, ma'am.
What about a relapsed brain?
So, it's not going to happen.
Start over again?
You don't start completely over. It depends on, her question was, what happens if you relapse? Does your brain kind of reset? It depends on how long you were in recovery before you had the slip. It depends on how long the slip was. So, if I'm 17 years into this thing and I go out tonight and I screw up and I come right back in tomorrow, my brain's getting back on track like tomorrow. But if I go out for a year and do what I was doing, then I'm probably going to come back in a similar state of mind. So the message is, even if a person slips up, even if a person drinks 2 beers downtown, whatever, get right back on track. Whatever. This isn't even about a fight. Get back to a meeting. Can you go back over to Favor? That would be the only thing I'd be saying to him. I would be. Is that what you said?
Yes, and he did.
Okay, good. And I would be saying things like, hey, this is if you're dealing with your loved one of the techniques would be, I'm not an expert on this. Get over there and ask them what they think. Don't try to tell them how to deal with that. Just tell them to get to a meeting where they can find somebody to help them deal with that. We know that people who keep trying when it comes to getting better with this stuff, they get better. They get better. People absolutely get better. Sometimes it happens way too slow, and sometimes it happens with way too many slips, and sometimes it's really frustrating, but people get better. And actually, to tell you the truth, I think people live lives beyond their wildest expectations. That's been my experience with people in recovery. It actually, my personal experience was I feel like I've exceeded my own personal expectations before I got into recovery. Yes, sir.
I was doing a little bit of reading about Suboxone, which my son supposedly uses, and methadone, which his wife supposedly uses, a double whammy. And as I understood it, and I may have it wrong, they said that the methadone was a drug in and of itself, but its 2 main characteristics were it was long-lasting, so you're not constantly looking for a hit, and 2, the body did not build up a resistance where you needed more and more. How does that clear the brain up? It seems to me you're still taking the same medicine, just in different doses.
So if you're taking it the way that you're supposed to, so these are 2 different drugs. So I talked about Suboxone. So think about it as the terms are a full agonist versus a partial agonist. Something that fully affects you and something that partially affects you. Methadone is a full agonist. It fully affects you. You're absolutely right. It's the same. Technically, it's the same as any other drug. But it is very, very long-lasting, so you don't have quite the euphoria, that kind of thing. So the way that it would affect you would be a little bit different than that. I want to get high, I want to get high, I want to get high. You can build up a tolerance to methadone. Wherever you read that or wherever that came from, that's not quite true. You can build up a tolerance. And actually, that's been one of the criticisms of methadone, because people will get on very, very high doses. But
what is it doing to the brain to clear itself up?
Well, you're not abusing it, so you're not getting those spikes. So again, you'll find a lot of different opinions on this. You also got to understand the other thing that's going on if a person's on methadone maintenance is they're not engaged in all those other things that are happening.
They're not in the back alley.
Yeah, they're not in the back alley. They're not, and so the idea would be that allows you to actually access a recovery process that will put you around. Going back to this idea that there's more to the medicine than there's more to recovery than just the medicine. So it's very controversial, guys. I have no issue with it. I have no issue with it whatsoever because this is my philosophy. Come in here no matter what is going on and let us help you figure it out. We love you no matter what. Come in here, methadone, fine, whatever. Suboxone, fine. We don't count days. There's none of that. There's none of that going on. We want you here no matter what. I've heard wide variety of experiences where methadone is concerned. And I will also tell you that, Suboxone is sort of being, how do I want to say this? It's sort of being pushed as more of the intervention of choice over methadone, that kind of thing. What other questions about the brain? What else we got going on? Yes?
I have a question. My husband is out of his 4th rehab. He was in there for 7 months and then relapsed and is continuing to use. Now, with a relapse, is it because of this or because after so long, like 7 months, he just chose to go use?
It's a great question. Her question is, he was in recovery for 7 months, he was in a program for 7 months, and then he went back out and now he's using. There's a lot of different things that can contribute to that. The first thing I would say is what was going on in those 7 months that wasn't being explored, because how in the world can you be in a program for 7 months and not, he must have wanted to use. That's my first thought. If I'm sitting somewhere for 7 months and I use as soon as I come out, it's probably because if you go back to this criteria, this idea of craving and thinking about it. A lot of times people, when they go to a program, they won't talk about that. So I've had this experience. I used to run rehabs. I've had this experience where people will be in rehab and they won't tell anybody that they're thinking about using. And the reason they won't tell anybody is because they get in trouble for it. Well, get in trouble for it might be the wrong way to say it. You're not supposed to be thinking about this. Come on, man. That kind of deal. They're not quite honest about where they're at. Sometimes it'll extend their stay if they tell people that they're using. So it could be that. A lot of times people will start hanging out with the wrong people again. I mean, that can contribute. I know a lot of people who've done well for a very long time, and all of a sudden, old friends kind of get involved, old habits, old behaviors. Have you guys has anybody in here ever tried to change anything and not been successful at it? If you don't say yes, I don't believe you. Okay? You're lying to yourself. We all slip up. What are the things that lead us to slip up? All kinds of different behaviors. All kinds of different behaviors. We get around the wrong people. We get around the wrong places. We start to repeat some of the old behaviors. You'll hear about people who are in recovery for a long time and they start to lie and they start to behave in a way that they're not comfortable with, and those guilty feelings kind of start to kick up. You'd have to talk to the individual person to figure out the details. The answer to that is, can you get right back on track? The answer to any of these situations, can you get right back on track? Do they have someone they can connect to? Are they going to meetings? Are they going to therapy? That's really what the family can kind of hang their hat on. Who else had their hand up? You did, right? Yes?
I didn't know if you knew anything about ADHD and the idea that dopamine is one thing that affects that. If somebody has been diagnosed with ADHD, is there a way, is that going to play into this?
So remember, if you're on any medication for a long enough period of time, you can develop a physical dependency to it. Does that make sense to everybody in the room? Even if you're on, let's just take a medicine that's not even addicted, like Prozac. If you're on Prozac for too long of a period of time, you'll become physically addicted. So regardless of the situation, if you're on ADHD medication for years and years, you can become dependent on it. The issue is whether or not the person actually has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The idea is that if you have ADHD and you take a stimulant, that it focuses you, and they literally call it a paradoxical effect. They don't even know why it works. They're not even sure exactly why it works, but it started off with kids. In some cases, it'll focus the person. The problem is that it's been notoriously overprescribed. And a lot of people have been put on this medication that didn't need to be put on this medication. Then that's all bad. Because let's get real clear about what that is. That is speed, right? If I went out and I took ADHD meds tonight, I'd be off to the races because it'd be a good time, man. So do you guys get that? If you take it and you're supposed to be taking it, that's one thing. It's like pain medication. If you, I don't know if you know this or not, but we hear all about the opioid epidemic. If you take pain medication for pain, legitimate pain, it actually reduces the likelihood of developing a dependence. But if you take it, because my knee hurts, that kind of thing, but you're really taking it for the effects. That's the struggle with ADHD meds. And, it is, I've heard some of the stuff about it being related to dopamine, and they think it's about a dopamine deficiency, but that isn't definitive. So my advice around ADHD would be get really, really good evaluations. And then the other part of it is there are new meds that come out that aren't stimulants. And so if you have anybody that you're dealing with and they need to be on ADHD medication, the psychiatrist has told them that, try to see if they can get them on something that's a non-stimulant, something else that can work. Yes, sir?
So like our son, when he would crash after the meds wore off, he'd be a nasty little piece of work.
It's
and
one
so
of the.
They actually started doing weed because it kept him calm and he wasn't nasty.
Yeah, the comment was if you couldn't hear, like when you crash coming off of that, it's not real pleasant. It's not real pleasant. Basically, chemically, it's the same as methamphetamine. We have to be honest about that. And then and remember, when ADHD was first invented, you had to be under 18 to be diagnosed with ADHD. You couldn't have ADHD if you were over 18. And they thought that about 3% of the population would have ADHD. They topped it out at about 25%. So the pharmaceutical companies did what they do well. They marketed this, they got it, they topped it out, and then they invented adult ADHD. They literally said, well, we just figured out that you could have it if you were an adult too. And college campuses are really, really a good place to market this new drug that can help you study and get through and perform in these very, very high pressure situations. So you go down to the infirmary and you get ADHD meds. And the person who's getting them is really, believes that they have ADHD because they have a doctor telling them that they have ADHD. And but remember, it didn't even exist when they first invented it. ADHD was not an available condition when I was in school. It was not. They called it BAD. And the preferred treatment was like a stick, right? So, they came up with this. They started treating it. We have to be very, very careful with all these medications, methadone or Suboxone or any of these. We have to be very, very careful, and you got to find a doctor that you trust and a psychiatrist that you trust. And I don't know how many people in here think that they can find that. Psychiatrists are hard to find. There aren't a lot of psychiatrists, period. There aren't a lot of psychiatrists in South Carolina. Greenville is better than some parts of the state, but it's tough, guys. You got to find somebody that you can trust, that's going to do an actual thorough evaluation with the person rather than what 5 minutes, 7 minutes. How you doing? Yep, here you go. Good job. We'll see you. See you in 3 months. That's absolutely fraught with peril, right? All kinds of bad things are going to go down if it goes down like that. So I'm not telling anyone to go off medication, but I'm telling you, get a thorough exam, get a thorough evaluation. All right. So I want to talk tonight about how you do these relationships and how you handle this and what you do if you're concerned about your loved one and regardless of what stage they're in, and not even if you're concerned, because would you guys agree that boundary setting continues throughout the whole entire process? I would probably say that boundary setting is part of life. It doesn't have anything to do, it's not only addiction. We all have to learn how to set boundaries in all kinds of different ways. All right? And one of the things that we want to encourage you, if you're dealing with this in your family and you're starting to think about what are the boundaries and how do I want our relationship to be now that I'm trying to change some of this stuff, it's not about controlling the other person's behavior. It's about how you want to be treated. A lot of times boundaries come down to, and the conversations between family members come down to, you can do this or you can do that, or you should do this or you should do that. We want to encourage you to think about it differently and think more about communicating about how it makes you feel and have it be centered on yourself rather than controlling the other person. Why is that? Why would we want to do that? What would be the reason for that?
You can't control them.
You can't control them, first of all. I mean, you can try, right? How many people in here, if you have an adult child, how many people in here have tried to control their adult child, right? It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I talked about this last week, that conversation you have where you start down that road and you start saying something and they're like, then they get all like bent out of shape because they feel like you're trying to tell them how to live their life and you're just trying to give them good fatherly advice. Like Leave It to Beaver type stuff. You know, come on, let's just sit down here and talk about your life. And then what happens? They get escalated. And they're not listening to anything I'm saying. And then I get escalated. And now we're both raising our voice. And what happens? It just ends in a big blow up. So you can't control them anyway. The other reason to talk more about yourself is it's harder for them to argue about how you feel about the situation. If you start telling them about their behavior and what they need to do and what they should do different, they can tell you how you're full of it. Would you guys agree with that? They can look at you and say, you don't really know what's going on with me. You don't really know what's happening with me. Don't tell me that I got to be in it, at a certain hour. Don't tell me that I'm not living my life the way I'm supposed to. You have no idea what's going on. You're the one with the problem. They can throw all that stuff back on you. But if you talk about how it makes you feel and how you're going to do your life rather than how they're going to do their life, it becomes much more difficult for them to argue with you and tell you that you're wrong. If you go back to this, guys, remember, you're never going to win an argument with a person whose brain is in that state of mind. So you have to start getting real strategic about this. So the other part of boundary setting, you have to identify what you want to do. You have to identify what are the limits and rules and how do I want this relationship to be. And then you have to be able to manage yourself while you're communicating that. And those two things together, they lead to healthy boundaries. Now, if you notice, this circle is a little bit bigger than this circle because I believe that managing yourself is actually the harder part of this process. The limits and the rules and defining on how you're going to want this relationship to be. So I'm just going to throw examples out there. It may or may not apply to your situation, but let's just say that it has something to do with financial relationships and you think the person is continuing to use and you're sort of like supporting them through this process. That's wonderful. Hello, it's Rich Jones. So if you think the person, if you're financially supporting them and the boundary is no more financial support, okay? That kind of thing. It's easier to kind of identify that than it is to communicate that. It's a very clear kind of thing. That boundary is pretty straightforward. Would you guys agree with it? Again, let's say I'm paying for my daughter's apartment. She's not going to class. She's using. It's very clear that this isn't working. I should probably not continue to pay for that apartment. So that part of the equation is easy. The problem is, how do I convey that to her in a way that she's going to hear and that I'm going to actually be able to follow through on, and it's going to lead to an implementation of a boundary. Okay? So the manage yourself part. Another example. Let's say it has nothing to do with financial support. Let's say it has nothing to do with that. Let's say the person is a complete independent adult. It has nothing to do with that. But every time you talk to them, you feel like they're under the influence and they get angry and you get angry and it turns out into an argument. It turns into a fight and they say nasty stuff to you. Let's just say that's a scenario. What would be the limit or the rule around that? What would be, anybody want to venture to say how you would want to handle that? What would be the logical thing to do?
Hang up.
I'm not going to talk to you when you're under the influence. Do you follow me? I'm not going to talk to you under the influence. So identifying the limit and the rule is probably the easier part. The managing yourself is the more difficult part. Now let's talk about the managing yourself. What kind of strategies and what gets in the way of successfully managing yourself when it comes to boundaries with your loved ones?
Recognizing how you being self-aware enough to identify what emotions you're experiencing so that you can even have a space between experiencing it and having the expression of it.
So your own personal, would you guys agree, your own personal emotions, and actually that's probably the biggest thing, your own personal emotional response to any given situation is going to make it very difficult to communicate this stuff clearly. Whether it's, I can no longer, communicate with you because Every time I do, you're verbally abusive, or I'm no longer going to pay the rent because you're clearly not doing what you're supposed to do. Whatever the thing is, that emotion is going to get in the way. That, you know, if you've ever had to deal with anybody and you were emotional, well, let's just even pretend it's at work. You tend to say things you don't necessarily, you know, you wish you wouldn't have said. Have you ever said anything and like it comes out of your mouth and you were like, you just like sort of, man, I wish I could live life on a rewind button sometimes, you know? And it's because I'm all worked up. It's because I'm all fired up. Now, what helps de-escalate that? What kind of strategies can you use to try to manage that part of it? The first thing is being aware. There's a lot of literature out there from a psychological standpoint that most people operate on automatic pilot. Most people are not aware how their behavior affects other people. Most people are not aware how they come off to the rest of the world. I don't know if you know that or not. There's literally, it's called your blind spot. How many people have heard about their blind spot? You're completely unaware that nobody really wants to be around you. There are two type of people in the world, right? Type of person, everybody's happy when they walk into a room. Type of person, everybody's happy when they walk out. You know, that second person many times doesn't know how offensive they are to people. They don't know how they're coming off. They don't understand or catch their own emotions. So how do you become more emotionally aware? How do you become more emotionally aware?
Listen.
So you listen. Listen to the other person. What else?
Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath. First of all, do we know that if you're a dude out there, do you know that there's more emotions than just anger? Let's start there. So if you're a dude, we want to let you know that there are other things other than anger. Guys are allowed to only experience anger, and the only way that they can express anger is by punching holes in drywall. Okay? So there's what? What are some of the emotions? Am I angry? Literally, and I'm not trying to talk down anybody, but I'm telling you, most of the time we don't notice where we're coming from. Is this fear? Now let's camp out and talk about fear for a little bit. I would make an argument that you're probably driven in a lot of these cases from fear. And it's fear of the worst. It's fear of the worst results. It's fear of all those situations where this might wind up. You know, fear of the very worst results. People have died from this disease, right? Fear of, are they going to lose their job? Fear of, are they going to lose their kids? Fear drives a lot of responses. And if you've ever felt fear, how does it present itself physically?
Heart rate.
What's that?
Heart rate. Your
heart rate goes up. It's kind of like fight or flight, right? So now picture yourself in that state of fear. So I'm going to take you through a scenario. A scenario is probably not all that hard for you guys to get in touch with. You know, you're in that state of fear. Let's just say that you're dealing with somebody and they're staying at your house for whatever reason, and they go out and you thought that they were going to be in at, like a reasonable hour, like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And you wake up and they're not there. Okay? And they have a history of going out and drinking too much, or they have a history of going out and getting themselves in some trouble. And what happens? You immediately kick into that fear. That fear kicks in, your heart rate goes up, you're all jacked up, you're probably up in your mind on the scenario and what's going on. And an hour goes by and you're texting them the whole time. And the whole time you're texting them, they're not answering, right? You guys, I could tell that I'm absolutely 100% talking about something y'all understand. Like, it's like for some of you this happened last night, right? So what's happening while they're not answering the text? Not only are you fear, now you're getting pissed. Now you're getting pissed, right? And so it's cranking up and it's cranking up. And then what happens? Then they come in the door and they're happy as all get out, right? They got a little buzz on. Hey, what's up, Mom? And boom, game on. All these things start rushing out of your mouth, start coming out of your mouth. You're not allowed to stay anymore. I can't believe this. And then you start saying all those things that you really wish you wouldn't have said. All those things about them. All those things that are about who they are, that make the situation worse. Now understand when I say this, guys, when I was doing the things I was doing, I needed to be held accountable, and I did do some things but it didn't do anybody any good for me to be told I was a piece of shit. Excuse my language. It didn't do anybody any good for me to be told I was a piece of crap. It just, what did it do? It just beat me down. I understand why it was said to me, though. Do you get where I'm coming from? I completely understand why it was said, because in that moment, everybody's cranked up. So you're going to have to, if you're going to have these conversations and work through this, you're going to have to find strategies to de-escalate yourself. And you know, in that situation, for example, you're not even talking about that during that night. That person walks in, you know, you should go to bed, they should go to bed, and you should talk about that in the morning. But even then, you got to figure out ways to bring yourself down. You got to figure out ways to kind of calm yourself down. I don't know how you calm down in a situation like that. I'm not sure exactly how you deal with that. You're probably not going to go to sleep. That kind of thing. But maybe what you can do is you can bring yourself down enough that you're not going to have that active confrontation when they walk in the door. Remember, it's not about letting them get away with anything. You may be sitting there right now saying, Rich is telling me to let them, you know, slide. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is be strategic and be smart about it. You want to have the conversation in a way that they're going to actually hear. You know, if they're under the influence, they're not going to hear anything. And that could be applied to any given situation, right? It doesn't have to be about a person coming in under the influence. So what other ways can you learn to kind of bring yourself down? What works when you're escalated?
The
Michael?
same way when I walked in here, you said you were struggling to talk to somebody. I feel like if I tell you how I'm feeling,
Yeah.
you release the power of that emotion.
That's a very good point. I don't know if you could hear what Michael said. If you talk about what you're feeling, the power of that particular emotion or the feelings around that tend to be de-escalated. That's a fact. A problem shared is a problem halved. As soon as you start talking about that to another person, a person who's going to be supportive, I wouldn't have said that to just anybody. You know, you were sitting there, I know who you are, we've communicated, I knew you're a safe person to say I'm having a bad day to. So if I say that to the wrong person, it could go over, you know, if I say that to the wrong person, I say I'm having a bad day, I'm trying to figure out how to make favor work, I'm trying to figure out how to make the finances work. If I say that to my brother, you know what he would say? Well, I don't know why you're working in that field anyway, dude. Come work for me. You know? So I have to say it to the right person. What else can help? Yes?
Breathing.
So this idea of breathing, and you talked about your heart rate being jacked up. You know that, like, as you get agitated, your physical symptoms go up. You could hook up a heart monitor, you could hook up a blood pressure cuff. Your heart rate goes up. Trying to take a deep breath and trying to calm yourself down. Some people would say you need to practice a preventative meditation practice. That you need to kind of take some time in the morning to try to calm yourself and breathe. And you know what? I used to think that stuff was so freaking corny. Just being straight with y'all. I used to just think that, like, but there is no question that works. There is no question that if you get up in the morning and you give yourself enough time for a routine, it doesn't have to, even if it's not meditation, it could be prayer. It could be reading a devotional and whatever you can do to kind of calm yourself down. A couple other things related to maintaining and managing your own emotions and managing yourself. And this is on the preventative end. This isn't going to help you in a moment, but some other things. We talk all the time about the three things that are known to reduce stress. Go outside. These are facts. Go outside, being out in the sun, being out in the weather. Go walk around the building. You know, go out in the woods. Laughter without question, and music. I've told y'all, prefer late 90s East Coast gangster rap. That's my thing, as you could clearly tell. I'm sure you would have predicted that. But whatever it is, have it be upbeat, that kind of thing. Those three things. Try to get in. What else helps with stress and managing emotions? What other suggestions would we have from the crowd? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just happy at home, safe.
So being at home and being safe. Yep. Being at home, being safe. Another idea is kind of either a gratitude list, or we've also talked about 3 good things where you try to condition your brain to notice positive stuff, and that also helps de-escalate and de-stress. I don't know if we've talked about 3 good things for a while, but 3 good things is a little different than a gratitude list. A gratitude list is, I'm healthy, you know, I have a good job, my kids are healthy. 3 good things are literally 3 good things that happen to you in any particular day. Like, I was running late for a meeting on Woodruff Road, and I knew I was going to be late, but all of a sudden I didn't catch any traffic and I got there on time. Or I was standing in line at the grocery store and I was running late, and all of a sudden another grocer person came up and opened up another line, and I went from number 10 in line to number 1 in line. Or you came to this meeting tonight and you thought it was going to be the absolute worst meeting in the world, and it only sucked a little bit. Okay? So you put that all on the list, and that's 3 good things. What else helps with yes?
My hobby is photography, and you can't be behind the lens looking at something, trying to figure out what exactly you're gonna do.
Yeah.
Thinking about something else. I was literally in North Carolina in the woods, and I got a call from my son's in-laws telling me he's now in the hospital.
Wow.
It just shattered me.
Yeah.
I was able to take the information, thank them, put the phone back down, and at least for an hour, clear my head again.
Yeah. You know,
what I was doing.
So there's a psychological principle associated with that. They call it flow. And flow is like being in the zone, and it usually is a hobby, or it's usually some kind of activity that you're completely immersed in, where you're not thinking about other things. You're not thinking about the mortgage. You're not thinking about what's going on with your son. You're not thinking about, you know, what you have to do at work. You're 100% immersed in the moment, and so finding things like that can also be helpful. What else? Anybody have any other suggestions related to this?
Go for a walk.
Go out, go for a walk. Yep, absolutely. Yes.
When you write down your problems and you can actually look at them, it's a lot easier to manage what you want to do.
Yeah. Start getting a list together. Start trying to take control of the situation a little bit. Now, again, I'm talking about, if you go back to this, because some of you might be here to try to figure out exactly what to do with your loved one. You know, you might come here tonight and you might say, that's not really what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear, you know, how do we get them in rehab? Or I wanted to hear, how do we get them better? What I'm telling you is that as you learn to manage yourself, you're going to get better at handling these situations. If you start to change, it's likely you're going to be able to change your relationship with your loved one. It just makes sense, right? A relationship is not one person, it's 1 + 1. So, you know, if this person isn't going to change, and here's the other thing, and I say this, and I would say this about my life and my family. It all happens within a system, guys. Nobody's issues exist in a vacuum. If you're part of a family, the whole entire family contributed to the whole entire situation, and that's okay. And so the whole entire family can contribute to the whole entire fix, and that's hopeful. It's not a bad thing. We got to get away from this idea that there's this perfect family out there, the Hallmark movie family, right? Where there's tension going on, but it's always resolved at the end, and they have Thanksgiving dinner, and everything's happy at the end, right? That's not how Thanksgiving dinner worked in my family. We had all that tension, but then Uncle Joe was passed out in the mashed potatoes, too. So I'm going, where's that in the Hallmark movie, man? So you got to buy into this idea that unless you can control your loved one, if you can control your loved one, then by all means do it. But if you're starting to feel frustrated with that, and you're starting to feel like this isn't going anywhere, then start to think about, like, as I start to manage myself, it'll be a positive effect. So you got to remember, there's your personal boundaries. That's how you want to be treated by the person. But there are also team boundaries, and this is really, really crucial, depending on what you got going on with the person that you're concerned about. You know, who else needs to be involved in this conversation, and who else needs to be on the same page? Let's just take an example. Let's say that you're convinced this person needs to be in rehab. Their use is out of control. It's dangerous. You have to identify who the key players are in this situation, and you can only go so far if you're just trying to get this done all by yourself. So, mom and dad, if it's a younger person, and mom and dad probably, if the person's married, the person, the spouse has to be involved. You have to start thinking about who else needs to be on the team. Who needs to be involved in this conversation? And as you're going through it, you can start to ask yourself, what kind of influence do I have over the person? Now, these are most effective, guys, if the person's not seeking any help. This is most important if they're not doing anything, if they're just continuing this behavior and they're going down the wrong path. If they're getting help, they're probably already on the right path, okay? But what are some ways that you can influence the person? First of all, there are financial boundaries. Are they living at your house? Are you paying for their car? Are you paying the rent? Are you paying for the phone? Are you paying for college? That kind of stuff. And then there's emotional leverage. Believe it or not, emotional leverage can be just as significant as financial leverage. One of the things that will happen when a person's in a bad state of mind, and I believe this is the case, whether it's mental health, or substance use or just stress or just emotional, they'll be doing the wrong thing and they'll look to their family for validation. They'll want you to tell them that it's okay. Okay? Because they know in their mind that it's not okay. So they're looking for you to, so you can start to use that emotional leverage. So if they're calling you every day and they're beating you up on the phone and they just want you to validate their bad behavior, then you start to say, I can't take these phone calls anymore. This is wearing me out. And then you're putting them in a position where they have to start to seek help. Remember, when they're seeking help, just if I can camp out here for a while, it doesn't always have to be a certain thing. In our society, we're obsessed with rehab. We live in a society where every movie the person runs off to rehab or this or that. They can also get help through what? Individual therapy. They can get help through meetings if they choose to. They can get help through, there's all kinds of different groups, all kinds of different places. However the person starts that recovery process, unless it's stone cold dangerous right now today, depending on the substance that they're using, you might not have that luxury. But we would say if they start that recovery process, then that's a good thing. If they're talking to somebody, that's a really good thing. They can start to figure it out. I mean, I've had a lot of experience where I've started at point A with somebody and, whenever they came, we thought it was just like DEFCON 5 and like the world was falling apart. But very quickly, they get better very, very quickly because they're finally talking to somebody about what's going on. And then what happens is, guys, as you move, the person moves. And as you start to change, the person starts to change. We always recommend if this is your first time here, let your loved one know you're here. Let them know that you're here so that they can understand. And when they say, what do you talk about there? Unless they called while they were here. Is that the person that you were here for? Oh, okay, all right. Because you should just leave the phone on if it is. If they're asking you, what are you doing there? What are you trying to figure out? You don't have to give them a big detail, but say, like, they're trying to help me figure out what to do. They're trying to help me figure out how to go about this. And then boundaries are for you. But they can many times influence your loved one toward change. So let's stop here for a minute and see what kind of questions we have or what kind of suggestions we have related. Yes?
So when you were talking about financial boundaries and leverage, if the person is intending to be in recovery and working toward recovery, even if it's not 100% straight shot, they relapse or go back and forth, which I understand is not unusual and even to be expected, that withholding financial support doesn't necessarily mean that is going to help them recover faster.
No, it doesn't mean that. And every situation is individualized. There is a part of the recovery process. And if you look at, if you think about the person's individual circumstances, so if you take me, for example, when I got into recovery, I was married and I had 3 kids, okay? I had to get it figured out relatively quick and go right back to work. And I didn't have time, nobody could really support me, that kind of thing. It was like I was up against it. But I have a lot of situations where people, they do have the ability to take some time and figure out where they're at with things. And they do get some financial support, or maybe they have their own financial support. And we say, let it take some time. In an ideal world, let it take some time. Does that make sense? But that doesn't mean that you go out of your way. Like, you don't go broke helping the person. But there is a part of this process that are starts and stops, and people are trying to figure it out. And there really is something about the word recovery. What does the word recovery conjure up when you think about it? It conjures up like a rehabilitative process, right? I'm telling you, man, it's way beyond just get your act together. It's way beyond that. If a person's talking to us, if they're here a favor, or they've come in contact with me, or they've come in contact with one of my team, it's probably because this is something else. And so, now you understand, again, every situation is individualized. And I've had circumstances where I've had 21-year-old dudes who were living in halfway houses for 18 months saying, I still need some time to recover. I think I'm going to be a professional Nintendo player, and my job is to kind of go to meetings and stuff, and that's not, there does get to be a point in time. What factors are involved when you start talking about relapse? It depends on how long it was, how much of a kind of setback that was, that kind of thing. But there isn't a cut and dry situation.
I'm worried about cutting off financial support, increasing stress, which causes more pressure to relapse.
Yeah. So and it's probably something that you definitely want to consider. And like I said, in an ideal world, people would have more time to figure that out. And then you also have a situation where people a lot of times will get jobs that aren't necessarily like, they're sort of like jobs where they're just kind of getting back into the workforce, and it's not even really about the money, it's more about getting back into a routine, that kind of thing. And you'll hear people talk about doing that for, a year. But again, I want to caution everybody, don't leave here, look at your individual situation and try to judge it. How much money do you have? Can you pull that off? Is that reasonable? Are you going to go broke trying to help the person? We don't want that either. But what we know is that this black and white way of thinking, that goes like this: just cut them off, don't give them anything, not even a bologna sandwich, right? I heard a guy say that one time. Don't even give them anything, not even a bologna sandwich. Okay, what the hell are you talking about? Who the hell wants a bologna sandwich? Right? And that type of black and white thinking is really what part of the problem is. That's really where the issue kind of comes down. You want to weigh it out and you want to think, and then you want to kind of have a conversation with the person, trust your gut through that. Talk to some people, as Michael suggested, find somebody to talk that through, that kind of thing. Yes, Carol?
This is actually a situation right now with my eldest daughter. She's an Adderall addict, among the beer and other stuff. But when she's on Adderall, like you said, and she comes down, she's mean and angry and hostile and all that kind of stuff. And this kept going on and going on and going on over the past week or two. And so I just said, I can't talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
But now I'm wondering, when do I talk to her again? Because she's always like that when she comes down. And she won't admit she even has a problem. She's been to rehab and blah, blah. So at what point, talk about black and white, it's all or nothing with her. If I talk to her at all.
How do you feel? So the question becomes, how do you feel after you talk to her? Is it hurting you?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Well, then that's where, I don't know if you can hear what she's saying,
yes.
But when she talks to her daughter gets mean, and then it winds up hurting Carol. And so the answer to that is, it's not about trying to change her behavior, it's about protecting you.
And that's what I'm doing, but I just wonder, at what point do I reach, I guess I'll know it when I know it. But
or maybe you don't for a while, for a long while.
That's my plan right now.
Yeah, I think if you are being abused and you are coming out of these interactions feeling worse about yourself and feeling like completely torn up, then it's not about trying to change their behavior, it's about protecting yourself. So I would say you set a pretty hard boundary there and say, I'm until further notice, this is a no-fly zone.
I thought
and then
that was right, but I wanted to double check.
Yeah.
I didn't want her to think I was shutting her out, but it's about me now. It's not about her.
Yeah, and what goes into that? You want to check your own feelings, and you want to see how you feel coming out of that. The whole idea of codependency comes from this idea of suspending your own feelings for the other person. So, in other words, it's not important what Carol feels, it's just important what her daughter feels. That's not good. You don't want to be there. You don't want to have that going on. You want to honor your own feelings. And again, I'm not sitting up here telling you that I know every answer to every situation. I'm not saying that I'm giving you the best, most perfect advice. What I am saying is you have a legitimate evaluation to make there, that there is no black and white way to go about that, and you want to work that out, and then you want to kind of trust yourself. And if you go with your decision, don't just go with it. Don't second guess it. You'll know whether it was the right decision or not, because if it was the wrong decision, it'll become evident. That kind of thing. Did you have something? Oh, okay, you're faking me out. That's all right. Anybody else have anything else related to boundaries or any other comments?
Just a comment on the financial. I've been through a lot of this with my son, but I would just be real cautious about giving him cash, at any point. That's been a mistake I've made in the past, but I would try every which way not to give him cash. Just one thing I found that might be a benefit to some people, they have a new debit card thing called Greenlight, and it's actually for small children, but it's worked really well with me giving it to my son because I can move money on there and I can say you can spend it anywhere, or you can only spend it at a restaurant or specific things. And to me, something like that's been better for me, as far as trying to control the money and not give him cash.
Right, right. Well, that's a different, there's two different dynamics. I'm glad you said that. You got two different things going on when it comes to money. One is, should I support him just because I feel like me supporting him is allowing him to use. The other is, should I give him cash? That second scenario is pretty much a no in every situation. Do you guys get that part? That's two different reasons.
But you think, when they ask for $10, or I want to get a hamburger with my friends or whatever, it's not getting a hamburger. We've talked about that before in here, but.
You tend to, when you're dealing with this and you have different people involved, especially when it's parents to children, this is mostly parents to children, you have two different ends of the spectrum. You usually have one person who takes the position of, I call it, kick the bum out position, and the other person, let's give them one more chance. And you got to understand that that's very, very natural. That's called homeostasis. That's the family system working itself out. You need one hard ass and one softy. Okay? What we're telling you is that you're going to need to come together. All right? Sorry about my language tonight, guys. It's been a very, very long day. But you're going to need to come together on this. You're going to need to work this out. And what you want to understand is that neither one of you are better than the others. Neither one of you are more right than the others. You both are reacting from this and from a certain position. But you want to be able to get on the same page as you walk this out. One of the best ways to get on the same page is coming to this group. Okay? And I say that not because I'm trying to get y'all to come in here because, it increases admission. I mean, it's standing room only. I'm telling you, because coming to groups is where you figure this stuff out. If you start coming to this group with the person that you're co-parenting with, you're going to start to figure this thing out. If you feel like you're polar opposites. And I've seen people come in here polar opposites. That, he's out. And the other end, no, I can't. I could never do that. You got to start talking, and you're both probably going to have to compromise. And you got to make sure that you know the behavior that you're trying to address. That's the other thing with these boundaries. Obviously, if the person's using and they're out of control, that's the behavior. But many other times, a person will be living in mom and dad's house, and people will be frustrated with each other and aggravated and worried, but you haven't actually defined what it is you're looking for from the person. Do they have to work a recovery plan to live with you? That kind of question. What is that recovery plan? So when your son comes home, have you guys talked about? And I'm just using you as an example because I happen to know.
He's coming this week.
Okay, are there expectations on what's that like? It's okay to say, hey, you got to figure this out. You can live in my house as long as you're not using. But then you can't become worked up if all of a sudden he's not going to meetings and stuff like that.
Let me ask you a question, because he is coming, and I did have a question. So in his program, he's been working the 12 steps. So he keeps, one thing he just told me, I just talked to him a few minutes ago, and in his mind, because they've never heard of favor down there where he is or whatever, and they don't understand the whole coach and the process here. So they're just telling him, okay, you need to get a sponsor, and you need to continue your 12 steps. So for him, I was already thinking, okay, I'm going to bring him to the 12 o'clock meeting every day, when he comes back next week. But in your opinion, does he need to go to a AA or
Is he
NA
receptive
meeting?
to 12 steps?
Yeah, he's in.
Then I tell you what I would do. If he's doing that and he's receptive, I would run with that.
Find him.
I would take him to a 12-step meeting even before bringing him here, because if that's what he's been doing, then that's what you want to go with,
Okay.
And Michael can help you figure that out,
I need some
and
help.
point you in the right direction with that. If a person's doing something, run with it. He could do both, really, to tell you the truth.
He just told me. I said, well, okay, I want you to get a favor start next week, because we're going to get him this weekend, and he said, well, I got to have a sponsor, and I got to continue my 12 steps.
I'd go with that. I would go with that.
That's where I wanted to ask you about your opinion.
Yeah, I would run with that. I would get him to a 12-step meeting. We got meeting lists in the room over here. I would run with that. Frank?
Rich, the Alano Club has a meeting every day at 12 and 5:30. They used to be just alcohol, but it's kind of everything.
So I don't know if you between the two of you, if you guys can get with her after the meeting and,
Yeah,
and tell her where to go. You know, you don't if a person is doing any kind of recovery program, you kind of want to run with that. You know, you don't want to make it any more complex than it needs to be. If he's already into that and he's saying I need to get a sponsor, then I would say take him to a meeting. If he comes to favor too, that's fine. If not, we understand. You know.
I got a comment in that regard.
Yep.
Saturday morning, men's meeting at Church of the Nazarene at 9 a.m. Best meeting for guys in Greenville.
Saturday morning?
In my opinion, yeah.
Yo, maybe you can tell me where that is.
You guys help her out after the meeting if you can. Any other comments about recovery plans or about defining the behavior? Any other thoughts or comments on that? Yes.
This is going back to compromising with the person, like letting them live with you and giving them money, or throwing them out of the house and, you know, not supporting them or anything. By doing that, isn't that going to make the problem worse, because they're going to feel, you know, nobody wants me, you know,
It's a great question. Her question was, you know, what do you do if the person's there? Do you throw them out? Could that possibly make it worse? You know, the answer is it could possibly make it worse. The other side of that coin is that it's already getting worse, or it already is bad. So there's no black and white answer to that. There are a couple rules or a couple ideas that we would tell you. You got to think through that, because whatever decision you make, you got to be willing to and ready to follow through. What we have found with this whole idea of parents who say you have to leave, many times they say that and they're not able to follow through. And so that actually makes it worse than saying anything at all. So what we would suggest is you continue to come here. You can also talk to somebody one-on-one. We have coaches that can help you figure that out. And you actually get clear in your mind on what you want to do with that before you even go forward with it. But it's it's a very, very tough decision, that kind of thing. Sometimes people will have to leave, and that'll be the thing that pushes them to recovery. Sometimes they'll have to leave, and that'll be the thing that it does make it worse, and things do get worse. I mean, I have seen people change under a wild array of circumstances. As soon as I think I have it figured out on this, here's exactly what's going to happen with this person, the absolute opposite happens. But there are ways to kind of walk that out. What I would say is communicate on it, get information before you make a decision, and make sure that.
And it doesn't matter how much I think I know. I have to understand. I have to let other people help them right now, because I'm too attached. Like the feelings are too strong. So,
yeah.
Like I can't allow them their process, like you're talking about, and because I care so much, I have to recognize that I have to allow other people to help.
Yeah, that's very important. And that's why being part of a group can help. You know, his comment was, if you're emotionally involved, it's very, very hard to make good decisions. Absolutely, I've experienced that in my life. You know, I've gone through that with many, many people where, you know, I'm Mr. Expert guy, right? And but if it's my own family, I butcher it every single time. Why? Because it's emotional. And it's that point that I made earlier, like emotions will get in the way of good judgment. And you have to, so what do? You get around other people and you get other people's advice. What other comments on this, at this point, guys? What other comments on this topic? Okay, let's see what else we got here. All right. All right, so as you're talking about this, as you're trying to communicate around this issue, whether it's kind of like you and, mom and dad communicating on what to do, or you trying to communicate with your loved one that you're concerned about, let's real quick, because we're running out of time, let's real quick talk about rules for communication where substance use disorder is concerned. Talk about it on a regular basis, not just when you're in crisis. This is, let's say mom and dad, you're dealing with a situation. Try to communicate on this regularly, not just when the crap's hitting the fan, for all the reasons we just talked about. It's not about winning an argument. It's not about getting your way in any of these situations. It's about trying to move the needle on recovery. We talked about the target. We talked about compromise. Here, this is real important. As you kind of go through this journey, be careful where you're getting your information, and try to cut out toxic people from your life. If you're here tonight and you're worried about your loved one, when you're communicating with people, if they get really, really negative, You know, and they start giving you a speech. If that was my kid, I got to tell you, let me tell you the one worst group of people on the face of the planet. People who don't have kids and have an opinion on what parents should do. And if you're any of you out there, if you don't have kids, shut your pie hole. Okay? Don't say a word to me about anything to do with parenting. You don't need to be letting any of that information in. Because what? You already have enough stress if you're dealing with this. You know, if there's a stress meter and it's 1 to 10, you're already probably cranked up to an 8. You don't need any of this other stress. And the other thing that we talk about a lot is also be careful about stress in other ways. I mean, we live in a very, very stressful world. We live in a world that's just full of conflict, right? You go on Facebook. You know, go on Facebook and go look for a political argument if you want to get fired up, right? Try to detach from a lot of those stressful situations. When you're communicating, put away the phone. How about that one? Put away the phone. If you're actually talking to somebody, put your phone away. Nothing more irritating. And again, you have enough on your plate. You don't need to get in that. What's your tone of voice? What's your body language?
You know, a device-free conversation.
A device-free conversation, Frank. That's what we're suggesting. You know, and if you work at it, you can wean yourself away from it. Okay? You know, first you do it for 2 minutes, then 5, and before you know it, you'll go 15 minutes without one. You know, avoid blaming one another for the situation. How about this one? Listen to learn, not listen to respond. You guys know what I mean by that? Listen to respond is you're talking to me and I already have the answer in my mind on what I'm going to say to you. You know, your loved one's telling you what's happening. He's telling you how he's doing okay, or she's telling you how it's going better and I'm feeling better. But while she's talking or while he's talking, you're already thinking about what they're doing wrong and how you need to correct them. That kind of thing. Elicit support if needed. We talked about that. And when you're done with these conversations, try to have a next step. What's going to happen next? You know, maybe we're going to follow up and talk about this again next week, or maybe we're going to look at another program. I know it's really, really difficult, guys. I'm up here talking about this as if it's easy. And you know, I've shared in here about, you know, some of the struggles that I've had along the way. And I have kids, and I know what this is like. But I'm telling you, like, if you're able to try to approach these situations from I hate to say this, almost like more of a business point of view, like, what do I do? How do I go about this? And try to take some of the emotion out, you're likely to be able to handle these situations better. So you start to try to get more planful about it. A couple other things about boundaries. No is a complete sentence. Right? You don't need to give an explanation for every decision that you make. You're simply allowed to make that decision. No, I won't lend you $1,000. No, I won't let you use and self-destruct in my house. No, I won't take your phone calls when you're being, you know, verbally abusive to me. That kind of thing. You're allowed to say no, and you're allowed to step back from it. And I wanted to take the last couple of minutes to talk about a couple other things. And we sort of talked about this with that scenario that I went through. But the other thing that gets in the way of setting boundaries is just how bad it feels when you have to set the boundary. Do you guys know what I mean? Just how bad it feels when you have to say no. How bad it feels when you have to say, you have to leave my house now. How bad it feels when the person comes and knocks on the door and you have to say you can't come in. You know, and so if you don't get it right and you feel like I let him in and I shouldn't have, so what? You let him in and you should have. Now you're going to have to it's not. This isn't a pass-fail exam. You guys understand that? There's no right or wrong way to do this thing. But how do you deal with that worry? How do you learn to deal with that? Like Carol's talking about cutting her daughter off. And how do you, quote unquote, live with yourself? How do you go to sleep at night when that's going on? What techniques do we have for that? What suggestions do we have for that? Anybody have any suggestions for dealing with that chronic worry? Yes.
I exercise, I meditate, I journal, I pray, I meet with friends, I talk to people, and I still worry. And I still wake up in the middle of the night and I can't go back to sleep.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a...
So maybe there is no way to get rid of chronic worry.
I don't think
or
there's
get
a
rid
way
of
to get rid of it, but I think all of those things help mitigate it.
Yeah. Help lessen it. Maybe it's taking less of a toll. How else do you deal with worry? How else do you deal with worry? Come on, who has the magic answer? Anyone going once?
I'll say something. I mean, I used to lay in the bed at night and worry and wake up all during the night and worry, waiting on that next phone call from my son. And I know I've told several people in here what I did is I took that telephone and put it in the kitchen in another room. And I quit taking those calls. I mean, I used to be terrified not to answer them, but I quit taking them and I got better.
Yeah.
And now when I, you know, even though he doesn't call and he's doing fine right now, the phone still stays in the other room. And I sleep every night. I don't have any trouble sleeping.
Yeah. That's so the physical
detachment. But I think
detachment.
it took me a while. I had to go through a period of time where it took me to get there. It wasn't overnight.
Yeah. What else? Any other suggestions? Yes.
I think there's part of worrying about not to worry.
Yeah.
You know?
Worry about worry. I shouldn't be worrying. There's something wrong with me. I shouldn't be worrying. I'm worried about worry. Yeah.
Yeah, just accept that it's
Yeah.
normal for you to worry.
It's okay to
You wouldn't
worry.
be a mom or you wouldn't be a dad.
Yeah.
You know, if you did not worry, because
Yeah.
there's reasons to be worried about.
Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Sometimes there's guilt for not worrying.
Oh, I should be more worried. I should be more caught up in this. Yeah.
You know, life's going pretty good, and you know she's doing her thing, and you know I'm feeling pretty good about things, and I'm not worried anymore. And then all of a sudden I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. Shouldn't I be more concerned about this? Right. Okay. Yes.
Sometimes I tell myself in the middle of the night, there's nothing I can do, there's nothing wrong. But first thing in the morning, I'll see what I can do about it.
That's not a bad idea. If I were to suggest a way of trying to think about this, and this is just an idea, it may or may not work, but so you guys are here tonight, you know, and understand statistically speaking that there are 200,000 people in Greenville County dealing with this very issue. 200,000 family members that should be in a program talking about this right now, if you believe the statistics around this issue. So you guys are part of a very, very small group of people that are trying to face this thing head on. And you're here and you're in a room, and by virtue of being here, you're staring it in the face and you're trying to get information on how to deal with it. Try to start telling yourself that, I have done everything I can for this situation for today. I have done everything I possibly can for my loved one for today. I've learned everything I can about this. You know, I've made some contacts. I've gotten some information. We're trying to figure out what to do, and that's all I can do for today. And people would say, turn it over to God at that point, or turn it over to whatever you believe, or put it in a compartment. But understand that you guys in this room you're living in the solution. So you have to at some point start to, this is tough stuff, right? Regardless of what we're dealing with, this is tough stuff. So you have to start to say, look, I'm doing the best I can with this. I'm doing everything I can with this, and I'm going to try at this point to kind of step back from it, and I'm going to try to sleep tonight. That kind of thing. Do you guys get that? If you're here, you're actually living in the solution. Okay? So give yourself credit for that, and try to step back from it, and try to not, you can't, worry. You can't figure this thing out tonight. I guarantee it. You cannot figure this thing out tonight. Write it down, deal with it in the morning, that kind of thing. The last thing I'll say, guys, is this week, do something fun for yourself. Okay? Do something fun for yourself. I did something fun for myself this weekend for the first time in probably 6 months. Okay? And that's not because of anything other than I'm a workaholic. But I did. And I got to tell you, I feel better. Don't I seem light tonight? Don't I seem very, very relaxed? I went to Pennsylvania and I spent some time. It's weird in my world. Even when I'm not working, the dudes I'm hanging out with are all in treatment. They all run treatment. We wind up going over to the one guy's treatment center, and we're all looking at treatment centers. But I was just doing something that I had no responsibility in, that kind of thing. It's very weird. It's very weird that I go to treatment centers for fun. But it was fun. I was hanging with dudes. I laughed a lot, that kind of thing. And so try to, it really made me think. It's very hard when you're in the middle of a crisis to actually just go do something fun without any strings attached. Just go do something for yourself. I would encourage you, if you haven't done that for a while, to try to get into that this week. All right. Now, if you have, yes, Frank.
I don't know if you've tried this before, but you've got a few free nights. Do you think some of these people would be, you know, maybe a family recovery meeting set up just like a meeting?
So there is a family recovery meeting just like a regular meeting, Frank. It's
Is it?
every other Monday. Okay.
Okay.
Have you been to one of
I know
those?
Yes.
Yeah. So
We had two people that got to kind of talk. I was just a smaller meeting.
oh, you mean smaller groups? Yeah. We haven't done that. It's great. It's a great point. It's been talked about a lot. We've talked about doing breakout meetings, having smaller meetings. We just haven't done it yet. But people have talked about that. You know, Frank's suggesting this idea of maybe having smaller groups. We've also talked about having more focused groups, talking about very specific things. I think all of that's on the table, man. I think it's all a good idea. If you haven't been to one of our other groups, next week we will. It's a little different format. It's not a lecture or a topic. It's kind of an open discussion. So if you haven't checked that out, we would encourage you to come to that. Also, I'm going to grab, when we're done here tonight, I'm going to grab some of our crisis line cards in case you have anything going on or you have any additional questions. But that's all we have for tonight, guys. So if we can get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, guys, thank you very much. Time flies.